The sun had barely cleared the horizon when I found the gate padlocked shut. My crops, fenced off like animals in a zoo. And there she was, Karen, the HOA president, strutting across my land like she owned it. You're probably wondering how I got here, and how the smug look on Karen's face would soon curdle into horror when she realized I now owned the very property she was trying to fence me out of, and held the only key to the gate she had just so proudly locked. The first time I saw the fence, I honestly thought it was a prank. I pulled up in my beat-up pickup just after dawn, the dew still clinging to the grass, and there it was, 6 feet of gleaming chain link topped with razor wire, catching the morning light like serrated knives. It wrapped around my entire crop field. My family's land. A place that had grown corn, tomatoes, and 3 generations of Callahans, now boxed in like a prison yard. A bright orange sign fluttered on the fence. Community Improvement Project. No trespassing. I stood there for a long time, hand on my coffee thermos, jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd snap a tooth. This land had been in my family for nearly a century. Long before the cul-de-sacs, the vinyl siding, or the color-coordinated mailboxes. I was here before HOA even existed. But that didn't matter to Karen Mitchell, newly minted president of the Willowbrook HOA. She had plans and I wasn't in them. I stormed over to the fence where a crew of men in safety vests were still bolting panels together. What the hell is this? I snapped. One of them barely glanced up from his clipboard. HOA directive. Beautification standards, he mumbled. On whose authority? I demanded. He just pointed toward the faux brick clubhouse on the hill like that answered everything. So I marched straight up there. Karen was behind her oversized desk, tapping away on a laptop like she was running a war room. It's for the good of the community, she said sweetly, like poison in tea. Your farm, while historic, no longer aligns with Willowbrook's visual aesthetic. The board voted unanimously to install a visual barrier. A visual barrier. As if my land, my work, my life was something ugly she needed to hide behind razor wire. I reminded her the land was agriculturally zoned long before her HOA existed. I had rights, grandfathered in, protected by state law. Karen just smiled wider, the kind of smile you see on people who believe they've already won. You're welcome to appeal, she chirped, sliding a thick packet of paperwork across the desk. In the meantime, daily fines for non-compliance will accrue. Non-compliance for farming. For growing food. For existing. I left without a word because I knew that appeal was a joke. Karen and her cronies didn't care about laws. They cared about lawns. And power. And turning everything they touched into the same beige monotony they mistook for order. I tried being civil. I wrote letters. Called meetings. Hired a local lawyer. Karen responded by doubling the fines and issuing new citations, unauthorized land use, failure to maintain landscaping standards, as if my rows of corn were somehow less tidy than her neighbor's plastic flamingos. At night, HOA patrol SUVs cruised past the locked gate, their headlights sweeping over the field like searchlights. The message was clear. I was not welcome. At the gas station, I overheard Karen bragging to her clique about how much my little farm dragged down their property values. Once he's gone, she laughed, we can finally open up the area. Parks, maybe a dog run. They weren't just trying to fence me in, they were planning to wipe me off the map. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I'd been preparing for this for years. From the moment Willowbrook's development crept up to my fence line, I started planning. Updating deeds. Researching easements. Spending late nights poring over brittle maps and old land grants in the county clerk's office. I talked to retired surveyors. I documented every fine, every letter, every ridiculous violation they sent my way. I wasn't just defending my land, I was building a case. Quietly. Methodically. Waiting. And when the moment came, when they finally made the mistake I needed, I was ready to strike. But until then, I let Karen think she was winning. I nodded politely at her fence. Inspected it each morning like it was a gift. Sat quietly in the back of HOA meetings taking notes like a schoolboy. Because when the gate finally opened, and it would, I wanted her to remember the day she locked it. I wanted her to remember the moment her smug little empire began to crumble. Because I wasn't just a farmer anymore. I was the storm they'd invited. While they patted themselves on the back for preserving community standards, I quietly paid the small fines, just enough to keep up the illusion that I was playing along. On the surface, I was the stubborn old farmer they thought they'd fenced in. But behind the scenes, I was setting the real pieces in motion. Surveyors, title reports, historical land use files. I dug into every crack they'd left behind in their rush to dominate the land. Karen and her clipboard brigade thought they were dealing with a relic. But what they had boxed in wasn't a relic, it was a wolf. And when wolves are cornered, they don't retreat. They aim for the throat. While Karen was busy playing queen of her pastel-colored kingdom, I was quietly redrawing the battlefield. They fought in public, fences, fines, official letters. I fought in the shadows, county records, handshake deals, forgotten easements, and quiet acquisitions. Most people believed Willowbrook ended where the HOA brochure said it did, a tidy boundary on a glossy map. But I knew better. The real lines were drawn decades ago, scratched into parchment and buried in dusty courthouse basements. The original developers had been ambitious, but they hadn't been perfect. They left easements, maintenance rights, odd slivers of land that no one remembered. Forgotten drainage zones. Utility corridors. Access paths that had never been deeded properly. Tiny cracks in their polished facade. And I was going to split them wide open. It started with a dirt road. 10 feet wide, barely more than a track, but it happened to be the only back entrance to their precious private clubhouse parking lot. Technically, it still belonged to Old Man Jenkins, who'd long since moved 2 towns over. When I showed him the original survey maps and explained what the HOA had been doing with his land, he laughed and sold it to me for a fraction of its worth, just to spite them. From there, I moved fast. Mrs. Patterson, a sweet widow with arthritis and an old mining deed, still held the mineral rights beneath a huge chunk of Willowbrook's east end. And those mineral rights included buried easements, clauses deep in the HOA charter that could be activated under specific conditions. I made her an offer. She took it. Parcel by parcel, easement by easement, I stitched together a legal noose. I used shell companies, family members, old army buddies. Nobody traced it back to me. Not yet. They just saw names they didn't recognize buying up land nobody cared about. Until it all came together. The crown jewel? The land under the HOA's own building. That smug little stucco box where Karen held her fake court. Turns out it had never been purchased, just leased. The lease was due to expire in under a year. The original owner had passed away, and the land had quietly reverted to his heir, a second cousin in the middle of a nasty divorce and desperate for cash. I made a clean, fast offer. No questions asked. 2 weeks later it was mine. The HOA was now holding meetings, filing fines, and flexing its authority from a building it didn't even own. Every deed I filed was another nail in Karen's political coffin. Every obscure clause I unearthed was another link in the chain tightening around their little empire. I wasn't fighting back, I was staging a controlled demolition. And Karen? She helped more than she hurt. Every notice, every fine, every smug letter gave me cover, made me look desperate. Harmless. Like a man on the verge of losing everything, not the one building the trap. They never saw it coming. They were too busy playing God with lawn lengths and Christmas decorations to realize the foundation beneath their world was shifting. And like water finds its path, power always finds the cracks. The more Karen pushed, the more neighbors she alienated. Folks who once nodded along at HOA meetings started whispering over fences and backyard barbecues. They grumbled. And I listened. I took notes. And when the time was right, I made quiet offers. A driveway easement here. A patch of land next to the community park there. By the time spring rolled around, I controlled over 60% of the land Willowbrook depended on for basic function. Roads, drainage, utilities, even the strip that connected their community pool to the main water line. It was all hidden under trusts, LLCs, and holding companies. Untraceable. Legal. Unassailable. Even the old concrete depot where they stored their landscaping gear? Foreclosed years ago. I picked it up for pennies. Just for fun. The day the paperwork closed, I drove past slow. Karen was in the lot, clipboard in hand, barking at some poor landscaping crew about hedge violations. She shot me a look as I rumbled by in my truck, scowling at the dust I kicked up. I tipped my hat. She had no idea. Not yet. But the clock was ticking. And I had circled renewal day in red on my calendar. The day everything changed, the HOA's lease on their precious little clubhouse was set to expire. And I knew exactly where I'd be the moment it did, standing at their front door with deeds in hand, pulling the rug out from under them so fast they wouldn't know which way was up. Until then I kept my mouth shut, paid the small fines, nodded politely at meetings, let them think they'd won. After all, what was I? Just one farmer. A guy with dirt under his fingernails and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Just a man they'd underestimated from day one. And that was their fatal mistake. Because when you fence in a man like me, when you poke and prod and try to squeeze him out of his own land, you better be damn sure he doesn't know how to burn the whole house down around you. And me? I was just getting started. It all came to a head on one sticky Saturday afternoon, the day Karen played what she clearly thought was her trump card. She'd been strutting around the neighborhood for months like she already owned my land, treating that fence like a personal trophy earned by sheer force of suburban entitlement. The fines kept rolling in, each more absurd than the last. Inappropriate soil coloration, 1 week. Unauthorized agricultural activity, the next. The board rubber-stamped every violation Karen sent their way, using them like little pressure points to grind me into submission. But I just smiled. Smiled when they took pictures of me in the field. Smiled when they sent city inspectors who left shaking their heads once I showed them the documents I kept in my glove box. Smiled when Karen, standing smugly at the front of the last HOA meeting, held up a shiny brass key like she just won the neighborhood Olympics. The board, she said, syrupy sweet, will maintain sole access to the community fencing area from now on. For the safety and aesthetic standards of Willowbrook, all non-board members are prohibited from entering the perimeter without prior approval. The crowd actually applauded. I sat in the back row, nodding politely, biting down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Because what none of them knew, what Karen herself didn't know, was that 2 days earlier I had closed the final deals that changed everything. I owned it now. All of it. The field. The access roads. The utility easements. Even the narrow strip of land where their fancy new fence posts were anchored. I had spent months untangling the mess they didn't even know they'd made. Every bad deed. Every lazy assumption. Every piece of land they'd claimed without checking the paperwork. Their entire community improvement project was sitting squarely on my land. And the best part? They had no idea. The real show began the following weekend, when Karen decided to throw a community beautification celebration. She plastered flyers on every door, rented a bouncy house, booked a photographer from the local paper. It was meant to be her victory lap, her coronation. I heard about it the same way I always did. Neighbors chatting, whispers on the wind. Only this time I encouraged the gossip. Let her hype it up. Let her invite the entire neighborhood. The more witnesses, the better. That Saturday morning, Willowbrook came alive like it was hosting a parade. Golf carts with balloons cruised the sidewalks. Kids shrieked and ran across trimmed lawns. Karen arrived in a pristine white pantsuit, sun hat like a crown, and the brass key dangling from a glittering gold chain. She stopped every few feet to flash it proudly like some kind of royal scepter. At 11 a.m., the crowd gathered near the gate. Karen stood before them, her loyal board members lined up behind her like ducklings. She gave a short speech about community pride and reclaiming the farmland for the greater good. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. It was her moment. Then she stepped forward. With a grand flourish, she slid the key into the padlock, ready to open the gate and unveil her triumph. The key didn't turn. Karen frowned. She jiggled it harder. Still nothing. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. She tried again. Her smile was cracking now, the first signs of panic blooming under her thick foundation. She turned, hissing at one of the maintenance men. He stepped forward, fumbled through a ring of backup keys. Tried one. Then another. Then another. The lock refused to budge. That's when I stepped forward. Out of the crowd, slow and steady. Dusty boots. Faded jeans. A quiet calm that cut through the tension like a blade. In my hand was a thick, folded stack of papers. And the look on Karen's face when she saw me? Priceless. The papers slapped against my palm as I crossed the street toward the gate. Problem, Karen? I asked, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. She spun around, her fake smile frozen mid-grin. There seems to be some kind of issue with the lock, she said through clenched teeth. Then her voice sharpened. That gate is HOA property. You're trespassing. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full-throated, hard-earned belly laugh, the kind that comes from months of waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Trespassing? I said, shaking my head. Karen's sweetheart, this land is mine. Always has been. The only thing that's changed is that now I also own the easements, the clubhouse lot, and, oh yeah, the ground your precious fence is standing on. I held out the thick bundle of documents to the maintenance guy. He took them automatically, blinking like he'd just been hit over the head. Certified deeds. Filed and recorded with the county registrar. If you don't believe me, feel free to check. I made sure they have copies. Silence fell over the crowd. The maintenance guy backed away. Board members clustered together like spooked sheep. Karen stood her ground, but I could see her knees starting to buckle. You're lying, she hissed, her voice cracking. This is a stunt. Nope, I said cheerfully, stepping up to the gate. I pulled a different key from my pocket, the one that actually worked, and popped the lock open. It swung wide with a long, satisfying creak. This, I said, waving toward the open gate, is private property. You're all currently trespassing. And if you don't leave in the next 5 minutes, I'll call the sheriff to explain it to you. A few of the smarter ones backed away immediately. Mrs. Carter from Maple Lane grabbed her kids and bolted. The local newspaper photographer slowly lowered his camera, unsure what to do. Karen just stood there, the useless brass key clenched in her white-knuckled fist. You can't do this, she whispered. I already did, I replied, flashing her a grin. And just so we're clear, any further use of HOA funds to enter or maintain anything on this land. That's embezzlement and criminal trespass. Notices have already been filed with the county. So if you want to test me, go ahead. Nobody moved. Then finally, with a sharp clatter, Karen let the key fall. It hit the pavement, small, powerless, and meaningless now. A scrap of brass that once meant control, now just a symbol of everything she'd lost. She turned and marched away, red-faced and silent, her little entourage scurrying after her like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I leaned casually against the open gate, enjoying every delicious second of it. Once they were gone, I turned to the handful of neighbors still standing there, the regular folks. The ones who hadn't come for power, just wanted to live in peace. I nodded politely. Feel free to enjoy the view, I said. Still a working farm after all. Just mine again. Some laughed, nervously at first. A few even clapped. And just like that, the power shifted. The HOA wasn't untouchable anymore. They were just another paper tiger that had picked the wrong person to push around, and lost. That evening I changed every lock. I installed new fencing along the roads I now owned. Every 20 feet, a bright new sign. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I even had a little fun with it. Posted one special sign right across from the clubhouse entrance. Smile. You're trespassing on farmer land. Karen tried to fight back, of course. Filed complaints. Threatened lawsuits. But it was too late. The law was on my side. The deeds were airtight. Every petty maneuver they tried only sank them deeper into the hole they gleefully started digging months ago. And me? I kept farming. Kept smiling. Kept polishing the only key that mattered, the one that opened every gate, every access road, every path they had once tried to block. They thought they'd fenced me in. But the truth was I'd fenced them out. The land was mine again, free and clear, just like it should have always been. And then, like dry kindling finally catching flame, everything exploded. Karen's humiliation at the gate spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. People who once clung to HOA rulebooks like holy scripture now crossed the street to avoid being seen with her. Board meetings emptied. Whispers got louder. Then the real consequences began. They couldn't legally maintain half their community amenities without crossing land I now owned. The clubhouse parking lot. The pool filtration shed. The trail leading to their overpriced jungle gym. And I wasn't in the mood to be charitable. So I sent certified letters to the HOA board with brand new usage agreements. They could still use the facilities, sure, but it would cost them a lot. My attorney, Claire, a no-nonsense pitbull who'd spent her entire career defending farmers from land grabs, made sure the contracts were bulletproof. Access fees, maintenance tolls, permits, application reviews. Every detail carved into stone. And it was just the beginning. Every community event, every clubhouse rental, every HOA beautification initiative, they all came with a new price tag. And every check made out to my holding company. Within 2 months, Willowbrook's once boasted reserve fund, the so-called gold standard of HOA fiscal responsibility, was drained dry. Just mowing the grass and hauling out the dumpsters was bankrupting them. Meanwhile, residents started asking the kind of questions Karen never planned for. Why were their dues skyrocketing while services kept vanishing? Why was the clubhouse locked every weekend? Why was the pool under maintenance during the hottest summer in a decade? The breaking point came at the next general meeting. A furious crowd packed the room demanding answers. Karen, now stripped of her sun hat and clad in a somber navy suit, stood at the podium sweating under fluorescent lights, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. It got worse. From the back of the room, Claire, my attorney, stood and calmly introduced herself. She informed the crowd that the Willowbrook HOA had been operating illegally on private land for over a year. That every dime spent on common area maintenance was now subject to reimbursement claims. That pending litigation would ensure it. Karen tried to deflect. She blamed the board. But rats know when the ship is sinking, and they turned on her without hesitation. She resigned within the week, citing health reasons, retreating behind the iron gates of her McMansion at the top of Maple Lane. Even that wouldn't last. With the HOA gutted and broke, routine maintenance collapsed. Property values began to slide. Word of the lawsuit spread beyond Willowbrook, scaring off new buyers, sending current owners into a panic. The management agency that once oversaw Willowbrook's finances bailed immediately after reviewing their liabilities. What followed was a slow-motion implosion. The neighborhood fractured into bitter little factions, each blaming the next for the collapse. Karen's own house, the one she paraded like a trophy for years, was one of the first to hit the market. It sat listed below value, collecting dust. A neighbor told me she even tried pitching it to some of the same developers she once courted for expansion. They laughed her out of the room. By summer's end, buried in legal fees and foreclosure threats, Karen was forced to sell. Her grand palace, with its marble countertops and imported hardwood floors, went for less than she'd paid a decade earlier. She left Willowbrook in the dead of night, a moving truck groaning with the weight of broken dreams. As for me, I didn't just want to win. I wanted to build. It started with the fields, those same fields they once wrapped in barbed wire like a zoo exhibit. I tore that fence down with my own 2 hands, panel by panel, tossing the twisted metal into piles bound for scrap. In its place, I planted wildflowers, native bursts of gold, purple, and crimson that bordered the land like nature's own victory banner. I reopened the old produce stand my grandfather once ran, offering tomatoes, squash, peppers, and corn picked fresh each morning. And the clubhouse? Bought at auction. They were so broke the HOA had no choice but to sell it. I turned it into a weekend market. Local farmers rolled in with crates of goods. Artisans set up booths. Food trucks lined the curb every Saturday. The heart of Willowbrook, once the symbol of HOA excess, was now full of laughter, community, and life. At the front gate, where a tacky faux stone sign once declared, Willowbrook, a master-planned community, I erected something new. 10 feet tall, forged in bronze and iron, it rose like a monument to every person who had ever been pushed off their land. A proud, defiant rooster, wings half spread, clutching a large brass key in its beak. At the base, a polished plaque. To Karen, who lost it all over a fence. It became a local landmark. Tourists stopped for selfies. Kids painted murals on the nearby walls, scenes of open fields and cloud-drenched skies. Free of fences. Free of rules. Free of fear. But for me it was never about the statue, or the market, or the applause. It was about the land. About freedom. About community built on trust, not bylaws. About calloused hands and neighborly handshakes, not citations and threats. Every morning I'd walk the property at sunrise. Boots crunching gravel. Fields stretching golden in the dawn. I'd pass the statue and tip my hat to the old rooster. A silent salute to the battle that had been fought and won. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind blew just right and the early light caught the brass key in that rooster's beak, I could almost hear her voice again. Karen. Somewhere out there sputtering with outrage. Still trying to find a way to unlock a gate that was never hers to begin with. But that key? It's mine now. And I intend to keep it that way. Because sometimes the fences we build to trap others are the ones that trap us instead.